Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today and welcome to Breaking Carbs on Init 91. Today we're going to be having a discussion about the game of squash. Now, squash has been regarded by many to be one of the healthiest sports in the world. And as a squash player myself, I can guarantee that it's possibly one of the fastest racket sports out there and an absolute thrill to watch. Today we're honored to be joined by three very special guests who will be sharing their opinions and journeys with us. Let's have a look at the first one. Okay, so that was Ritwik Bhattacharya, who was India #1 for 5 years and reached as high as top 40 in the world. He's currently a coach and founded Start Academy, which is just a couple hours outside of Mumbai. Let's have a look at our second guest. And that's Paul Assaiante, who is the head coach of the US national team and also the head coach of the Trinity College men's team, a team which has been one of the most successful squash teams of recent years. Let's have a look at our third and final guest. And that's Saurav Ghosal, who has held the spot of India #1 for 13 years in total and was also the first Indian to break into top 10 in the world. Hello everyone and welcome to the show. Ritwik and Saurav, you've both played professionally and it's no secret that squash isn't the biggest money sport. At the same time, you guys are, Saurav, if you were to compare you to, I'm a Nadal fan, so I'm going to compare you to Nadal. But if you were to compare you to a Nadal or a Federer or anyone else, you're just as fit, you're just as talented, and yet you're not kind of, squash players aren't going to be on the list of the wealthiest athletes in the world. And yet there's such a pull towards it, it's a thrill that you kind of invest in. So what do you think is the pull of squash that you personally feel and that keeps inspiring you?
I think the main pull for me is that it's the challenge of getting on court, producing the best I can produce, and creating a legacy for my country moving forward. Traditionally India hasn't been a powerhouse in the squash world. I think from also rans we've become very competitive on the world stage over the last 10-20 years, and our next step is to kind of start winning on the world stage, big events, and that's what kind of pulls me there. In terms of just the squash, I think it's just pure happiness and joy of being on a squash court and hitting a squash ball. That's the reason why I started playing, and that's the reason why I'm still playing even today. I mean, the kind of stuff that we do in training, I'm sure when I look back after I finish, I'm going to be thinking like, what were you doing? You're absolutely crazy to be doing all this. But because I love the sport so much, that's what kind of pulls me back. In terms of squash not being the wealthiest sport, and maybe we don't get compensated commensurate to what we should, depending on our physicality. I think it's probably not the right way to look at it. I think it's about what value we bring to on the outside. And today, tennis or soccer brings more value to broadcasters than squash does. And until we can garner that sort of pull with the general public, we can't expect to be paid in the same way. So that's a journey that the game as a whole has to take, and TV has a big role to play in it, and hopefully we will get there very soon, because our sport is a great sport, and the athletes that are part of this sport are one of the best athletes in the world, and they deserve the best platforms to produce what they're capable of.
And to add to that, I think, I mean, it's one of the most amazing sports, squash, to play. But what's happening is that the amount of effort that is being put in, the spectators don't really get to know, and that somehow has to be maybe mentioned in stats, maybe in heart rate, maybe in the way we see the game, because we traditionally look at the game only from the back and the back of people's heads. And Saurav and me discussed this many times when we were doing our tournaments and things like that. And if we, for the layman, had another view, which was the front face view, where you could see the expression and the effort being made, I think that would make a big difference to someone who doesn't play squash. And I mean, we have to change the way it's looked at. With the glass court, with the work PSA has been doing as well, has been phenomenal. But the prize money has to go up. We need to have bigger prize money tournaments, which will all come with TV and better viewership. Maybe the way forward is to even get into sites like Betfair and Bet365 and get a larger larger group of people even betting on squash, which will also increase the number of people watching the sport. And again, popularity goes up. All the best sports in the world are heavily bet on. So that changes things as well when the viewers go up, viewership goes up.
I completely agree with what Saurav said in terms of we need to make our athletes, our players, bigger than life, and we need to make sure that people out there in the public eye know just how much effort and just how hard these people are training and how much they're putting into it, how much they're sacrificing for the love of the game. They're starting to do little things, but we're not doing a very good job of marketing it. But they're starting to do little things like having heart rate monitors and showing what the heart rates are on the players as they're playing and seeing how quickly they recover. But what we don't do is we don't tell people what all of that means. So for someone like me, when I'm watching these guys play and I see when there's an appeal and how their heart rates go from 205 to 170 in 30 seconds, it's like, my God, that's superhuman. But the spectators don't know what that really means. And I think if we can come up with some of those kinds of things, we can get a greater appreciation for just how amazing these athletes are.
Ritwik, let's just chat with you about Start Academy for a minute, because you have founded an exceptional academy which is a couple of hours outside of the city, and you're training tribal kids who, before 2 years ago had no idea what squash was. So what was your inspiration behind starting this, and what are your goals for the future with the academy?
The inspiration was that I found that, after playing squash for 15, 20 years, the intent was to give back a little bit. And when the traditional means, I worked a little bit with PSA to develop the game. We did some tournaments. But the most important part of it is for a larger subsection of the public to be able to play the sport. And unfortunately, with squash, especially in India, it's only in the cities and in the armed forces where there's squash courts. So a large section, maybe 70% of India, or maybe higher, 80% of India doesn't even have access to a squash court. And it was, I found I was helping kids who were from more affluent backgrounds, and felt like I was a sellout in a way. I felt I needed to help everyone and not just be based in the cities and have my own place. So yeah, it was interesting time to after playing to think about how to go about it. And I think the idea came about on its own, and it sort of grew into its own shape because went and saw some places, and the land which I was looking at was touching this tribal village, and I was like, what if we can put a squash court over here. And one thing led to another, and the next thing we know, these kids are really talented. And what we've proved is that between normally the tribal kids and kids from economically difficult backgrounds are not really good with hand-eye coordination. They're good in long distance sports and things like that. But seeing the way they're playing, seeing in 2 years, 2.5 years, it's really inspirational. And I just know that we need to have more centers where which is on the rural doorstep, because most of the kids in the city don't have the time nowadays. They have 1 hour to play in the morning, 1 hour in the evening, and they're really too busy. Whereas these kids in the village are playing the whole day. The court's busy from 4 in the morning till sometimes 1 o'clock at night. And this is not coach. They're coming there because it's their way of getting out of everything they're getting into. So I think squash really works well. And we need to get the grassroots. We need to go deeper. And America is doing a lot of the countries around the world where they've done it. It's been amazing. I mean, look at Egypt, look at America now, the kind of work that's happening there with city squash, and even Paul's been doing a lot of stuff. So there is a lot of talent in India. We are as good, I believe, as the Pakistanis are and were, and the Egyptians and some of the best players. So it just means we need to touch a larger population and really see how they can use the place and the facility. And then because if you're training 100 kids in the under 9 category, you're going to have 20 kids who are going to go on to do well. But if you're going to train only 100 kids in the under 19 category, it's going to be a much more difficult proposition. So it's about catching them younger, giving them access, giving them really good coaching, which is again an area we need to really improve in, because we are a really big country and we're not really giving a lot of time and effort and upgrading to all the existing coaches, the people who are really spending the time with the kids. So it's a many pronged approach, but I think the future is to go to where the kids are hungry and where they're keen and where they want to do well. So that's why the Start Academy came around. It's like, let's start with somewhere, let's start somewhere. And what happens a lot is that if you are only coaching in some areas in the cities, you're not allowed to get kids from everywhere. It all becomes about the members and the people from there. So having my own place has really helped in that way, to be able to allow anyone to come, and no matter what background, and not being putting someone down or putting someone up based on their economic background. So it's interesting. It's a starting experiment or a project, and let's see how it goes.
Yeah, Paul, I'm not sure if you're fully aware, but Ritwik has started an academy that's a couple hours outside the city, and he's coaching, I think, over 100 kids. I personally train there, and there's over 100 tribal kids that he trains, who before 2017 had zero idea what squash was, and quite possibly hadn't even left the little area that they grew up in. So it's really inspirational stuff. And I personally think they're going to have a superb future ahead. But Paul, coming to you, you obviously have curated pretty much arguably the best team over the past, say, 2 decades in terms of college squash, and they've done very well. It's very well known throughout the squash world that the Trinity squash team has done very well. But you have actually picked out a lot of players from India, whether it's Manik or Parth or Supreet, or even currently you have, I think, a couple of Indian players on your team. And, we always talk about countries having their own styles and own techniques, whether it's the Egyptians or the English players and stuff. So what do you think it is about Indian kids that helps them stand out, if at all?
Well, first of all, I wanted to say, Ritwik, what you're doing is amazing. We have quite a few, about 25 urban programs here in the United States, but they're all in the cities. So what you're doing, I tip my hat. There probably aren't many tribal type situations in the U.S., but that's remarkable. With regard to the international recruiting, this started in 1998, and our president was very interested in diversity. And so he said, go out and find the best and the brightest from around the world. With regard to the Indian squash players, India has such a strong educational system that it's not difficult to find young people that qualify for the higher standards that we aspire to have. So it's been very easy on an academic standard or level. Most of these young people now in India want to go to an Ivy League school. It's all Ivy, Ivy, Ivy. And so typically we get that slight step down academically from the brightest people in the country. But what I like about that is our guys and gals come here with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder and want to show that, you know what, I'm every bit as good as that person, and they work very hard. In terms of styles, there are definitely styles, the differences. You know, we have the English players are a little bit more meat and potatoes. You know, the European players are pretty much up and down the wall and, you know, creating opportunities. The Egyptians are just going crazy. If they could shoot off the serve, they would. You just never know when they're going to bring the ball to the front of the court. And that breaking of the patterns is definitely confusing. The Indian players I've had were very smooth. And the thing of it that I have found mind blowing is, to a person, the Indian boys that we've had on our team were very respectful. They they loved their family. They wanted to do right by their family's name. They're very respectful in the facility. I don't have to worry about them. They're just a higher caliber type person, and it's one of the reasons why I've tried to recruit so many. Um, and thankfully, with people like Ritwik and Cyrus and everybody else over there doing such a remarkable job, there is a lot of great young talent coming over. So we certainly appreciate all you guys are doing.
Saurav, you've obviously been competing with various juniors. Even in the professional tour, there've been quite a few who are in their teens, and you've been seeing how squash has been developing in India. What is your take on the next gen and the future of squash, particularly Indian squash?
So I think Indian squash has always had a lot of potential. It's been a question of realizing that potential first on the world stage in the junior level, and then transitioning on to the senior ranks. I think in the past we kind of failed a little bit in managing that to a great extent. I think we've done very well with this generation that we have right now. In my opinion, this is the best generation we've ever had in Indian squash. Um, and we still have a few more years left to kind of take it to the next level. But the generation after us, there is talent, and I can see that these kids can, if not equal, but like better what we've done. But they need the right guidance and the right kind of knowledge and expertise to put them on the right path. So I think a lot of the stuff that Ritwik said about increasing quantity, because that increases your odds of producing champions, is very, very important. But at the same time, it's also important to increase the quality in terms of the people who are actually telling the kids what to do from a very, very young age. And I think that's one area which needs to be plugged in pretty like aggressively on the Indian side, because I think there is a lack of knowledge to produce top level world players at this current time. It's not going to happen overnight. I think it's a process, and it's going to take a few years. But I think that's a process that needs to be started now, so that over a period of time we can start reaping the benefits of that knowledge and that expertise. So putting kind of systems in place is very important, both at an individual as well as a systemic level, institutional level, so that the kids can actually realize their potential. I've always believed like the best you can do is to make sure that a particular kid plays the best that kid can possibly play, depending on their potential. If you manage to do that, that kid is a success. And I think if we manage to do that, we will produce a lot of top players moving forward in the next 5 to 10 years.
But we always speak of there being two routes in professional squash, or on the way there. The one being, taking the college route, and then playing professional squash, or the more sort of traditional route of, playing when you're 16 or 17 and deciding to play professionally. And I know that everyone here has had their own journey. Sort of, you chose to go to England and you trained there while also playing squash. Ritwik, you played professionally from a really young age. And we would love to hear from Paul if he comes back. But Ritwik, what do you think is the thinking process behind taking these decisions, and what do you think a player should ask him or herself before kind of taking that leap?
Well, I think it's all personal, I mean, you see someone like Ali Farag, or even from an Indian perspective, like a Siddharth Sachdev. A lot of players, Indian players, went to America. They played, and they continue to play after finishing. But in general, my thought process is that you need to go to the doorstep of what you want to do. So if you want to play pro squash, then join the PSA. You know, if you want to become a pilot, go to the flying school. So basically, the intent is most important. I don't think the education. I mean, all the schools and colleges around the world are giving good education. So it's a personal choice for me. When I was at making that decision, I thought more that 4 years of college would be incredible. Would be a lot of fun, a lot of friends. But that's something I was willing to sacrifice because I knew for if I played 4 years of pro squash, I'd be in a much better position. And plus, at that time, there was these NCAA rules where you couldn't play professionally. Plus, I was studying in Dehradun. My father was in the Air Force. Jump to Delhi was a big enough jump, and joining Stephens, I really didn't need to go to America. So there are pros and cons. It depends on what is really firing you off. I mean, I'm sure Saurav also had a lot of people asking him, a lot of colleges asking him at a certain time to go to America and study there. But in general, I think if you love squash, then squash is your university, and it's a university of life. And what you learn along the way, you don't. I still don't have my degrees. I finished my university in Delhi, and I've never picked them up. So depends on how you are looking at it.
Saurav, what do you think? I know you had a little bit of a different journey. So, what is your input on that?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing that Ritwik said regarding this is intent. I think you need to understand for yourself, not from anyone else, just yourself, what you want to do with your life. So yes, I had a lot of like offers to go to America to study, but I went to England because my intent was to play professional squash, and at that point in time, I felt like going to train with Malcolm Wilstrop was my best bet. And the reason why I went to the University of Leeds was because that was the closest university that I could get into where I could train with him. Now, if I had to make a decision today, I think American squash has changed a lot. College squash has changed a lot as of today compared to when I was going to college. I think there are a lot of good quality coaches there now. So I mean, I'm training with one of them, and David Palmer, who's at Cornell right now. So I think if you kind of decide that okay, I want to play squash, I think college is a way that you can go as well. But you have to kind of go to the right place, to the right coach, to the right program to kind of give you the best education for your squash as well. I think that is important. I think going to university also builds you as a person. So I think the way I developed as a person for my 3 years at university in England has made me a stronger human being, and I think that kind of translates onto court in a lot of ways as well. But I don't think there's any wrong or right decision over here. I think it's something which you need to kind of find the perfect fit for. It's like choosing a coach, just because you go to a coach who's produced a world number one doesn't mean he's the best coach in the world and he's going to make you world number one. Another person who's never produced a world number one could be your right fit and he could make you world number one. So I think you need to really find the right fit for yourself and find the right synergies and the right environment where you can thrive and reach your potential. And I think that's a personal decision, like how Ritwik said so.
But do you still think that in India, women get the same amount of support and just encouragement as men? And if not, then how do you think we can change that?
Definitely don't get the same kind of support, but there are a lot of places, and we're trying to make a change. I think in some ways the whole infrastructure is not made out for something like that. And in a lot of sports, I mean, you take cricket, the women's cricket team has not got the same kind of support as the men's cricket team. In squash, I think we've done better, and it's generally people who are working with a sport who decide all these things. So the people who have, at the moment, or the last 10 years, been working with squash have tried to develop it. But again, I mean, we're talking about the top 10 players, yeah. But when you go down to the top 200 players in squash, or the top 500 players in squash, or the top 1,000 players, how many girls versus boys are playing? You look at the tournaments, the junior tournaments. Are there as many girls playing in the junior, under 11, under 13 categories as the boys? And the answer is that they aren't. So I don't think squash is really looked upon as a sport for girls at the moment in India, and that has to change. But with the squash train that is happening right now for the last 25 years in India, there's been a lot of more girls in the urban areas who have played squash, who had access and have done well. And again, lots of talent. The girls in India have a lot of talent, and they need to be given the right support, the right platform, and the right space, which is conducive and positive.
So look, I think as a game on the world level as well as at the national level, I think at the top end we are making all the right noises in terms of like equal prize money and things like that. But I think what we need to understand is that the issue about women not getting the same opportunity runs far deeper. It pervades society. It's not just in sport. It's in everything. When you go to the villages in India, for example, the small towns, or even the big cities, a lot of the families like they think that girls get educated and then they just need to get married or have a kid, and that is the truth. I mean, I'm not making generalizations for everyone, but most families are like that. So I think that kind of thought process is definitely changing, but it's not changed to the degree where it's equal to if a boy and a girl are sitting together and they say, okay, a guy can do whatever they want in terms of playing a sport or going and working a job versus a girl doing the same thing. It's harder for the girl, and that's the truth of life. And of course, sport is an avenue for that to change, but it's not going to happen like most things overnight. I think over the last 10, 15 years, I think we've made a decent jump in that regard. I think more girls are getting educated to begin with, which was not the case a long time back. I think that is the first step. Education is very, very important, because without education you can't think for yourself in the right way, and that helps the girls to make their decisions, which affect their lives moving forward. So that's great. I think as long as we are moving in the right direction, which I think we are for the most part, I think girls will start getting more opportunities and demand more opportunities for themselves, like the way they are doing now. In terms of talent, I think boys and girls are equally talented. It's not a question of a guy is more talented or a girl is more talented. I think every individual has their own unique talents, and it's about understanding what they're very, very good at. So a girl could be brilliant on the squash court, and a guy could be brilliant on the football field, for example. It just depends on what you're very good at. It doesn't matter what sex you are. That's not the determining factor of you being very good at something. So I think once we can kind of get through societal pressures, family pressures of understanding that girls are very important to family as well, and they're pride of the family and the nation. I think we will see more girls taking part in sport, and they will shine like a lot of them are today. In a lot of different sports, and we will be in a much happier place than what we are in right now in terms of the numbers. If the numbers that we are at this point in time.
Yeah, amazing. Well, honestly, thank you guys so much for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure to have you all taking out the time joining us. Thank you so much.